Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. We're going to continue in Psalm 78, picking up in verse 17 and going through verse 32. Here's the text. But they continued to sin against him, rebelling in the desert against the Most High. Okay, so just for context, in the opening 16 verses, we established the premise. We're going to review God's wondrous works because Ephraim, for example, which is singled out in verse 9, ditched on the day of battle. They were not living according to God's commands. They were not holding fast to God's covenant, and they'd forgotten the wondrous works that God had done. And there's this shout out to the parting of the Red Sea, saying the water stood firm like a wall. It's such a compelling image too, because that water wall was as firm as God's love for his people. It was the sturdiest wall on the planet. And it's forgotten by this time. And the hope is that we would do what God intended in the first place and pass his law that he has written and given to our people as Old Testament Israelites to our children, and they would pass it to their children and pass it to their children. But the truth of the matter is that we've had some really rebellious and stubborn ancestors, and we don't want to repeat that history of rebellion. We want our kids to lead more godly lives than our parents did. We want generationally this never to be forgotten. So there's this shout out to the miracles of the Exodus and God providing water for his people at Horeb and Meribah. But the text continues, they continued to sin against him. They deliberately tested God, demanding the food they craved. Okay, have you ever demanded something from God, feeling entitled to it? Do you see how this line of thinking is what was rooted in the original temptation itself? Within Satan's words to Eve were the idea that God's holding out on her, that God, who had put her in perfection and provided everything free from toil she could ever want, was holding out on her, and that this tree from which she is forbidden, the one thing in the world, literally, that is forbidden, is God holding back on her. Satan tries to put the idea in her that if she eats of it, she'll be like God. And this idea festers. The idea that I could have more, but God is holding out on me. I think that's the line of thinking behind extramarital affairs. Demanding the food they crave. They wanted and they missed, according to the biblical text, they missed garlic and they missed leeks and they missed all the food that they had even when they lived back in Egypt. So bizarrely, they're waxing nostalgic about when they were freaking slaves. And they begin to demand food from God. And this is not a fervent prayer of great faith. This is an entitled rant of a spoiled kid. They demanded the food that they craved. Specifically, they spoke against God, saying, "Is God able to provide food in the wilderness?" Yes. Look, he struck the rock and water gushed out. Torrents overflowed. This is the third time this kind of imagery has been employed in this psalm. But can he also provide bread or furnish meat for his people? Well, yeah, of course God can. Therefore, the Lord heard and became furious. Then fire broke out against Jacob, and anger flared up against Israel, because they did not believe God or rely on his salvation. He gave a command to the clouds above and opened the doors of heaven. He rained manna for them to eat. He gave them grain from heaven. People ate the bread of angels. He sent them an abundant supply of food. He made the east wind blow in the skies and drove the south wind by his might. He rained meat on them like dust and winged birds like the sand of the seas. He made them, referring to the quail, fall in the camp all around the tents. The people ate and were completely satisfied, for he gave them what they craved. Before they had turned away from what they craved, while the food was still in their mouths, God's anger flared up against them, and he killed some of their best men. He struck down Israel's fit young men. Despite all this, they kept sinning and did not believe his wondrous works. this demand for signs and wonders, and in this case, just physical sustenance, physics-breaking miracles over and over again that still don't satiate, that still don't cause them to bow in reverence to God. And even after seeing the Red Sea parted, even after being fed meat from heaven and manna from heaven and water from rocks on multiple occasions, they still keep sinning. They still don't believe in God's wondrous works. This is the reason for God's anger. Yesterday we talked about this, and this is a common theme in this section of the Psalms too, as we're in now, I think, the fourth book of this, or this is the third book of the Psalter. Look, the highlight reels have merit, and there's beauty in reminiscing of everything that God has done. Because the devil cannot undo these things, but he can cause us to forget them. And isn't that effectively the same thing as not believing in it, not remembering that it exists, that it happened, that it's real, that God has done this? I'm a little embarrassed to admit how many times I've been worried about something that God has dealt with previously and then that God dealt with again. That those things that are stressing me out and hovering over my head, they seem familiar. Oh yeah, that's right. God has totally squashed stuff like this many times before in years past. I'm getting a little bit of salt in my pepper, and I'm going to start sounding more and more like an old man. I thought I could start talking like an old man now. I just turned 40, man. But then you guys said, no, you can't talk like that till you're 65. So I got another 25 years before I can bust out all the old man rants I've been practicing. I'm going to be an outstanding curmudgeon. I can't wait. But in waxing nostalgic about their slavery rather than reminiscing reverently about God's miracles, they effectively are in a position of atheism. Without recalling the wondrous works, the beautiful truth of God's word, and the outstanding things that God has done, we can often miss the point and overlook all of God's provision, all the ways in which God has spoiled us, all the things that God has given us. There's a show called Last Chance U. And the season that focused on Laney College in Oakland, California, was especially fascinating to me. And the head coach is like a legend around there. He's been there forever and led them to multiple junior college kind of championships. And he hits a breaking point where he's fed up with his players because he buys them new helmets. They get all this nice gear. He feeds them, and they don't appreciate any of it. The anger that he has for his players is on a small scale compared to the anger that God has for his people at this point. They've utterly forgotten. They have failed to do what Psalm 78 is prompting us to do, and that is go through the highlight reel of all the great things that God has done. In this section of Psalm 78, we see that God is angry with his people, that God disciplines his people, and he disciplines them severely. There are equal parts miraculous provision and then severe discipline in this text, because it is a lack of faith that causes us to worry at the arising of familiar foes to God. And it's demonstrable atheism to function in a way that acts like God has never done this before. They didn't rely on God's provision. They didn't believe in his salvation. He gave them everything that they craved, and they continued in their sin. So God is angry with his people. They don't see this coming. At this point, they are more than completely satisfied, everything that they've wanted. They still have the food in their mouths, verse 30 says. And their lack of gratitude angered God. Take a moment in prayer in light of this portion of Psalm 78 to check your heart for a lack of gratitude for all the great things that God has done. May we not repeat the mistakes of the Ephraimites. May we not repeat the mistakes of these stiff-necked Israelites. Do a deep inventory and see to it that you express all the gratitude you can, knowing that you're not even fully aware of all the things that God is currently holding at bay, and for your whole life, all the things that the devil wanted to do to sift you like wheat, and God denied him permission. You will never know what those were. So express gratitude to God. Rely upon his salvation, not your own merits, not your own will. Take up your cross, die to yourself, follow Jesus, and look back at all the great things that he's done. Go through the highlight reel, express gratitude, do a deep inventory for any lack of gratitude where there should be gratitude.